Ryan, who's coming on next week. Like, you have a great group of people. It's
we've been so lucky. It's been really amazing. And there's a lot more to come, and more people who are, who we're reaching out to are reaching out to us. So I think this is going to be an ongoing thing. I mean, I certainly hope that the quarantine doesn't last forever, or for as long as it may last. But the truth is that I think we've learned from this that this is something people will be interested in and will enjoy, I think, beyond a time when we are trapped and can't and do things. So
no, it's a cool addition to kind of your own book club. I really love it.
Yeah, we're excited about it.
Very exciting.
So we're
okay. And I actually have on my website, which is just sarahhurwitz.net, I actually have book club discussion guides. So if you are discussing it with your book group, or just even yourself, like, you can just download these guides. They're Word documents. You can edit them however you want, but they're just kind of questions designed to be thought-provoking and really get people talking.
I left your book in the corner, in a hard to reach corner of my table here, so I'll bring it closer.
Oh my gosh.
It was fun to revisit it. I mean, I read your book in the fall when it came out and when we interviewed you for the podcast, and then I was rereading it last week and was just feeling like it's so interesting to, it's so interesting to realize the different questions we bring, which is always true. Anytime you read a book, again, you bring different questions, but I think particularly in this moment, which we'll get to talk about a little bit. So
I think I also find that particularly with Jewish texts and books that I understand them like in some way. And then when I read them again a year or two later, I've changed so much. I've read other books. I understand them either more deeply or just with a different perspective. So I think the Jewish tradition of like rereading the Torah every year, I think there's real power and wisdom to that.
It's so true. Okay, we'll get started in a minute, I think.
Great.
Yes, I'm betting on the jewishLIVE website as we speak, and that is done. Okay. Judith, should I do the first kickoff and pass to you?
Ooh, my Omer counter just
oh, nice.
My Omer counter just went off. Perfect timing. It's set for 8 o'clock every night.
I got a daily text from At the Well. It was awesome organization that he has a little bar, little thing in it every day. It's very cool.
Yeah, nice. It's very cool. Nice. Yeah, Lex, if you want to start tonight, go ahead.
Cool. Okay. Well, welcome everybody. All 218 of you in Zoom and counting. All of you on Facebook. All of you on YouTube. Wherever you are. Digitally, the digital geography of where you are, whatever website, and whatever physical geography you're in. In the chat, we have some beautiful sharing about areas of the country and other countries that you're here from. So keep that coming. Introduce yourself. Hello, I'm Lex Rofberg. I am one of the co-founders of jewishLIVE, which is a brand new digital hub. I guess it's not totally brand new anymore. We're about a month old now. Veterans of this crazy world of ours.
I think in Jewish time, that's still pretty new.
Yeah, that's true.
You're new for like 200 years, I would say.
Yeah, that's a good point. So we'll take it. We're new. We're shiny and new. jewishLIVE, little logo here. We're a new digital hub for all sorts of live streaming programs. This being one of them. We're thrilled to be partnering with the Jewish Women's Archive on the Quarantine Book Club, QBC for short. Make that catch. We love it. It sounds like it's catchy, but we're thrilled to have Sarah Hurwitz tonight. I'll let Judith fully introduce her, but one shout out I would make first, past tense shout out, Sarah Hurwitz has already been a guest star on some jewishLIVE programming on some of our other shows on Judaism Unbound Live. And the big announcement tonight is Sarah Hurwitz will soon be offering regular offerings on jewishLIVE, a program recurring starting soon. We haven't totally set the launch date just yet, but it will be in the not too distant future. So those are some exciting things. To learn more about jewishLIVE, just head to jewishlive.org. To specifically access this show, so the Quarantine Book Club, you can head to jewishlive.org/QBC, just those initials, and you can see all of the past episodes and catch up in case you missed any. So, and I know Jewish Women's Archive also has a link on their site for that. So with that, I will pass back to you, Judith, and I'll eagerly listen to what is going to be a great conversation.
Awesome. So thank you, Lex. I'm Judith Rosenbaum. I'm the CEO of the Jewish Women's Archive. Really, really glad to be here tonight all together. I've been looking forward to it. This was a little bit of a longer break since our last one, and just exciting to return to this community. So JWA, as I hope you all know now, but I'll just say briefly one last time, that we're a digital archive that helps expand the Jewish narrative by documenting and sharing Jewish women's stories and drawing on the richness of our history to inform how we understand our world today and what we can do to change it. Please check out jwa.org. This is just one of many programs and resources that we offer. And there's so much more to discover there. So I've been thinking a lot about how we are in this kind of liminal time right now, both in our own lives. We're living in this time of kind of great uncertainty, not sure where we're headed, and also in terms of the Jewish calendar. And as I mentioned a second ago, when I said my Omer counter went off as we were starting, we're in the midst of counting the Omer, counting the days from Passover to Shavuot. For those of you who haven't counted yet, it's the 15th night of the Omer tonight. So we are on a journey, and tonight's talk will in part be about Jewish journeys. So before I introduce Sarah, I just want to say one moment of logistics. We have a large crowd, as you can all see, which means we don't have video and audio enabled for all of our participants. But we love for people to introduce themselves in the chat box. Please tell us who you are and where you're from. It really helps build a sense of community. And once we start the conversation, also feel free to put in any questions, and I'll be drawing on those in the second half of the program. So we're so delighted to have Sarah Hurwitz with us tonight. Sarah served as a speechwriter in the White House from 2009 to 2017, first as a senior speechwriter for President Barack Obama, and then as the head speechwriter for First Lady Michelle Obama. And prior to serving in the Obama administration, Sarah was the chief speechwriter for Hillary Clinton on her 2008 presidential campaign. And she's the author of this great book, Here All Along, Finding Meaning, Spirituality, and a Deeper Connection to Life in Judaism After Finally Choosing to Look There, a title which is very long.
It is long.
But you managed to fit it so beautifully on the cover anyway. So welcome, Sarah. Thank you so much for being with us here tonight.
Oh, thank you for having me. This is a joy. I'm such a fan of the Jewish Women's Archives. I'm such a fan of jewishLIVE, and I'm just thrilled to be here. And thanks so much to everyone who showed up. We have more than 300 people. This is unbelievable. I'm totally thrilled about this. So thank you.
So there's so much to say about your book, but before we get to your book, I just want to put aside the question that everyone I'm sure always has for you, which is, what was it like to be the speechwriter for Michelle Obama? How did that happen, and what was it like to work for her?
Yeah, I mean, it was a joy. I mean, in terms of how it happened, it's not like I applied for a job online. It's a very strange path. I started as an intern in Vice President Al Gore's speechwriting office in the summer of '98. I got 2 junior jobs after that in politics, both of which were total failures. They were both in speechwriting, and I really didn't know how to write speeches. I was 23. I had no experience. And so I went to law school thinking like, okay, I'm going to be a lawyer. I'll grow up, get a law job. That's what I'll do. On my 3rd week of class, I met a guy named Josh Gottheimer, who is now a congressman from New Jersey. But back then he was a law school classmate, and he'd previously been a speechwriter for President Clinton. And the two of us just started freelancing together to earn money for law school. We were just speechwriting together. And we got jobs in General Wes Clark's 2003 presidential primary campaign, and he lost. We got jobs on Kerry's 2004 presidential campaign, and he lost. Got a job for Hillary as her chief speechwriter in 2008. She too lost. It's like not a great record so far of the failed jobs and the losing campaigns. But then I got hired on the Obama campaign, and he actually won. Just a very new experience for me. I was like, wow, I didn't know you could win these things.
Right.
This is great. Like, what do we do now? So I went to the White House, and I was there to write for him, but I had helped Mrs. Obama with her 2008 Democratic Convention speech. And I would help her out here and there in the White House. And after a couple of years, I just decided I liked writing for her better than writing for him. And in what was a very surprising White House career move, probably including to President Obama, I moved from writing for him to writing for her. And she was a joy. I mean, this is a woman who knows who she is. She always knows what she wants to say. And, people always say, oh, what was it like to put words in her mouth? And that almost makes me laugh. It's like, have you seen this woman? Like, no one puts words in Michelle Obama's mouth. The trick of being her speechwriter was really to channel her, not to script her. And so I
Mhm.
spent a lot of time hearing her talk about what she wanted to say, hearing her articulate her ideas. And it was really my job to weave those into a draft and then to just go back and forth with her. Edits upon edits upon edits. She was very engaged from start to finish. And when people say, oh, she seems so authentic, it's not seems. She is. This is who she is. She doesn't say what she doesn't believe. So and she was fun and funny and warm. And I miss working with her.
Yeah, I think probably everyone in the world is like, it seems like a person you'd want to work for.
Yes, definitely.
And she seems like a natural storyteller too.
Totally. Her instinct is always to paint a picture. Her instinct is always to touch people's hearts and their souls. She's not trying to be a policy wonk. She wasn't trying to kind of, show how smart she was. I mean, she's brilliant, but she wasn't trying to convince people that she was smarter than they were. She was trying to honor their stories and really move them. And that is just the ideal person to write speeches for.
So I'm guessing that the move from being Michelle Obama's head speechwriter to writing a book about Judaism is a slightly unconventional choice. I mean, I know it must be hard when people have to leave the White House at the end of an administration and people must go on to do lots of things, but I'm guessing you might be the first to leave to write a book about Judaism.
Yeah, my colleagues were surprised, I think it's fair to say. I would run into them after leaving the White House and I'd say oh, I'm working on a book. And they'd be like, oh, great, like a political memoir, speech writing. I would say, actually, it's a book about Judaism. And they were like, wow, okay. One woman actually said to me, she was like, no. Like, your first book is about politics. And then you can write that weird book that no one will ever read. I was like, wow.
Thanks.
I know. Thanks for the vote of confidence there. But yeah, it was a sort of unusual decision. It was very surprising to anyone who knew me for any period of time because I grew up with a very limited Jewish background. I went to the 2 services a year on Rosh Hashanah and Yom Kippur that I didn't really understand or like. Went to the Seder that was boring, and that was Judaism. Right? It was 3 kind of dull holidays. And after I became a bat mitzvah, I thought, okay, well, good, I'm done. I don't have to do this anymore. I'm a cultural Jew. I'm a Jew by heritage, but if I want meaning or spirituality or connection, I'm obviously going to have to look elsewhere because Judaism is 3 boring holidays and a vague feeling of persecution. Like, that is Judaism. Then fast forward 25 years, I broke up with a guy I've been dating, and I just was kind of lonely and had a lot of time on my hands. And I heard about an intro to Judaism class at the local JCC, and I signed up to fill time. Could have been a ceramics class, could have been a karate class. I just needed to fill time because I was kind of lonely. And, what I found in that class really blew me away. There was just so much wisdom there that Judaism had to offer about how to be a good person and how to lead a meaningful and worthy life and how to find profound spiritual connection. And so I started learning. I took another intro class. I read hundreds of books, and I found it incredibly hard to learn about Judaism as an adult. Just to put together even I didn't even know what the Torah really is, right? It's like the thing on the scrolls, it's in Hebrew, it's old, it seems important, it's always been taken out in the synagogue. Like, that's what I knew about the Torah, and I'm not unusual in that. Actually, a lot of Jews is where, the Talmud, I'd never heard of that. So just putting that all together was very challenging. And I found that the books out there tended to be either kind of intro nuts and bolts books, which are great for getting the basics and the how-to, or these very sophisticated esoteric books about one tiny piece of Judaism that are also really great, but they take a real investment and you need some background to really kind of like dig your way through them. And I kind of wondered, like, where is the book that, while uncovering the basics, also unearths Judaism's deeper, more transformational wisdom in a way that someone who isn't an expert can appreciate. Although weirdly enough, many people who really love my book are really traditionally observant Jews who've said, oh, your book is really for me. Which I just thought, like, it's funny, that was not my target audience, but a lot of them say, like, this is a fresh take on Judaism. I feel like maybe I'm going through the motions a little bit, and this book has made me rethink some things. So that's been exciting.
Yeah, that makes sense to me. It's like you bring beginner's mind to it, and that kind of unfolds a whole bunch of questions that people who are in it might not think to ask, but actually might have those questions and just not have given language to them.
Exactly. It's the beginner's mind. I think that's exactly right.
So before we get into some of the content of it, I also just was sort of wondering, like, What was it like to go from writing in someone else's voice to writing your own story?
It was, I mean, that's such an important question because it was a really big leap, right? Like, I think you appreciate as someone who knows as a writer, knows writing, like, writing for someone else, you're behind the scenes, it's not about you. And so suddenly to have to write about myself, that was very hard. And I kind of tried to keep myself out of it, especially in my chapter on God. I just thought that's so personal. I don't want to talk about what I think. And it was boring. Like, it read poorly, to try to kind of hide my own voice. It didn't make sense because this isn't some academic, authoritative, disembodied voice kind of book. This is a perspective. So I had to get over that hump. And then I had to get over the hump of writing to be heard versus writing to be read, which are two very different skills, very different. So I'm just going to say, I just said, which are two very different skills, period, very different, period. And I guarantee that no one was thinking like, well, those were two sentence fragments. I mean, that's, this is how we talk. It's comfortable, it's natural, it's conversational. And suddenly I had to figure out how to deal with language on the page that conforms to all the rules of grammar and punctuation. And I couldn't start every sentence with the word because, which I found annoying. I couldn't use sentence fragments. And when you're a speechwriter, you rely a lot on rhythm and tone and how things sound to kind of convey meaning, and you lose that in a book. So that was hugely challenging for me.
That's so interesting. Yeah, as somebody who's a writer for the page, I would think it would be hard the other way. Like, whenever I have to write for speaking, I feel like I have to chop everything up into smaller pieces. And
it is, and this is a lot of journalists who try to become speechwriters really struggle because they're so trained to write to be heard. I mean, to write to be read, that trying to write for the ear is much harder.
Were there parts of your experience as a speechwriter that you sort of brought to this in terms of like how you take material and make it understandable to people or kind of translate it for people?
Yes. So, I mean, my speech writing skill was probably the most, I would say was by far the most important skill that I brought to this book, because Judaism is not super accessible. Like, it is just, we don't proselytize as Jews, which I agree with. I'm in favor of that. But because we don't proselytize, we haven't really figured out a well-developed language to explain all of this to people who know nothing about it. This isn't something that we've spent hundreds and hundreds of years really focusing on. So trying to figure out, with Judaism, it's like there's no natural beginning. It's like, where do you start with Judaism? Where does it begin? I mean, even if you start on the beginning of the Talmud, it's like, from when does one recite the Shema? It's like, sorry, what the Shema? It's very, everything in Judaism is sort of hyperlinked to everything else. So I think that the skill of a speechwriter is to take a bunch of complicated, disorganized, confusing, but also really powerful, brilliant, wise, moving stuff and explain it clearly and give people the context and the background that they need to understand it. So, I mean, think of a phrase like the rabbi said. And people say this all the time. Well, the ancient rabbis said X. If you're me 7 years ago, you think, well, okay, who are the rabbis? Oh, okay, in the year 70, when the temple was destroyed by the Romans, it's like, destroyed the temple. Oh, okay, we used to 2,000 years ago sacrifice animals at a large temple in Jerusalem. It's like, I'm sorry, why? Well, because the Torah said that we should. It's like, okay, what is the Torah? It took me 2 chapters to give people enough background to understand the phrase the rabbi said. So definitely that speechwriter skill for clarity and for understanding that you never sacrifice accuracy ever, but you do sometimes sacrifice a little bit of precision for the service of clarity and moving people.
Yeah, they're right. I mean, I think that that's part of what your book does so beautifully, is like take things that are complex and give people a way in without limiting you, without sort of flattening it to one perspective. That's part of what I really appreciate about it, is like you bring in so many different voices and perspectives, and make it possible to not have it feel like it's a it's a big mishmash.
It's funny because in my acknowledgement section, I acknowledged I had dozens of rabbis reading chapters or the whole book and giving me feedback. And someone said to me, I do not think that collection of rabbis has ever been together on the same page, because there are like ultra-Orthodox rabbis, renewal rabbis, everything, every kind of rabbi you can imagine. And I value that. I've learned from Jews of every type of background, from people who aren't Jewish. And I think that diversity of perspectives is really important. And I think a lot of people responded to that from when they were from different backgrounds. Like, oh, there's someone like me quoted throughout the book as well. So that was important to me.
You've redefined what it means the rabbi said.
Very much.
It's a different group of rabbis, but
exactly. The ancient ones would have been very surprised by who's included in that, the rabbis.
Yes, well, that gives me a lot of hope, actually. I love that because it means there's interesting and exciting and unexpected things coming down the pike for all of us. So thinking a little bit about all of the Jewish wisdom that you kind of processed and put together in this book. And so now from this moment, which is really a moment of crisis, are there particular things that you studied in the course of writing this book that are speaking to you right now in this moment?
Yeah, I think I've been thinking a lot about two aspects of Judaism that I think, it's funny because these are the things that I think have most resonated with most of the people I've been talking to about my book. Really Jewish ethics and Jewish spirituality. I think these are, so often when people say, well, I have Jewish values. I believe in social justice and tikkun olam, and I'm a Democrat. It's like, that's so great. And that's also, those are Christian values and Muslim values and Buddhist and secular values as well, right? But Judaism has this very specific way that we do social justice, the specific ways that we treat other people. And thinking about all of the Jewish ethics I've studied, I'm studying all of the thinking around speech, how we use our words every day, gossiping, shaming people, telling the truth. I'm thinking a lot about how we're all communicating in this time of COVID-19. And I do see these impulses that I have, and I think others have, to shame people who aren't behaving like we think they should behave. And Jewish law compares shaming people to murdering them. Right? It's a really serious prohibition. And I sometimes just hear that in the back of my head when I'm about to kind of say something that calls someone out, and I kind of want to rethink of okay, can I convey this maybe without doing it in front of other people on an email? Maybe can I do it privately, kindly, kind of doing the things that Judaism asks me to do. I think the thinking around chesed, I've been thinking a lot about chesed as well, which means loving kindness, which is, the requirement that when someone we know is vulnerable, we have to come to them physically. Right? If they're sick, you don't just send a get well card, you go visit them at the hospital or at home. If someone has just lost someone they love, you don't just send flowers, you actually show up and you are there for the funeral, you're there for the Shiva. We can't do that now. That is not safe and not acceptable. So what do you do now? How can you have that ministry of presence for people and be just deeply, deeply with them through a screen over the phone, right? I think we're still called for that, to have that kind of loving presence, but we have to figure out ways to do it differently now. And I think that's very important. Also just thinking about Jewish spirituality, for so long growing up, I really did think God was the Jewish God was the man in the sky who was in control of everything and, kind of rewarded and punished people as they deserve. And I've never bought that theology. And I think that's a real tough theology right now. I see people trying to make it work, and it's it's tough. And it bothers me, honestly, to have people trying to justify this, and it's punishing. It's guys, that's an ancient theology, and we are modern people. So let's actually look at what hundreds of years of Jewish thinking about spirituality offers us. And it's not just a man in the sky, right? There are Jewish mystics who say that God is everything. You're God, I'm God. The individual who's homeless on the street, that person's the divine. There's people, Martin Buber says God is what arises in deep human relation between two people being fully vulnerable with each other. Mordecai Kaplan says God is the process by which we become our highest, truest selves. So I think that just understanding that there's actually kind of a way to engage with the divine. And it's something that I've developed over years, especially on silent Jewish meditation retreats I attend, just being in touch with this, what I think is the sort of, the source of all life in the universe. It's a source of love and growth. And I've had a couple of conversations recently with friends where it's come up where we talk about when do we feel like we're in touch with the divine? And one woman said it was when she was serving people she works with through her nonprofit, and just being able to lift up people who've had a really hard time. And when they say to her, hey, you changed my life, she's like, I feel so close to God right then. Or I talked to another woman who's had a really tough childhood, and she's coming into her own now, and she's finding her own way. And she says, I feel really close to God when I listen to this voice that says, no, actually, you're not worthless. You actually have something to offer. And I just, I really wish we would talk more about God, because I think, especially in moments like this, it is helpful to have an adult spirituality that can kind of guide us through.
Right. And there's an opportunity, I think, as you're saying, like to be forced to rethink things that might have just been old models that are stuck in our heads. And those models are really hard to get out. I mean, as like someone who's been a feminist my whole life, I can't believe how much there is this kind of male image of God still that I'm like constantly railing against, but it's still there, right? It's like, it's so deeply ingrained, but there's such an opportunity in a time like this to, I mean, I think for many things, like the thing that's hard about it is it forces change, but then it forces change. And that's what's good also. Like there's creativity that emerges. And some of that is like, I've been thinking a lot about interconnection and just feeling like the way that a virus shows us that there is so much deep interconnection among people, that is also one of the ways that we can understand God.
Yes, absolutely. Absolutely. And look, I think that God is the source of all life in the universe. It's the power that makes for, our growth and actualization. That's what I think the divine is. How do I relate to the divine? I relate to the divine as a you, right? I think of the God in very human ways because that's how I feel love and connection. If you asked a tree, it probably has a different way of relating to God, right? Like we relate to the divine in, through the limits of our tiny human hearts and minds, right? So I think you can think that the divine is one thing, but you can feel and experience and relate to it as something else.
Right. And that's okay, right? That doesn't,
That's okay.
I think that's one of the things that I think is like, we forget that we have permission to be irrational about this. Like, it doesn't need to all make sense. It just needs to feel right in the moment.
And that's so deeply Jewish, right? We've never done systematic theology in Judaism. There's no like definition or creed or dogma of God. We've never done that, and good for us. I think that reflects this profound humility of us saying, you know what? This is so much bigger than our tiny human minds can categorize or define. To do so is almost a kind of idolatry, right? You're sort of reducing God to something that you can fit into your human categories. And what we've said is like, we don't know. Here are the instincts we have. Here are the intuitions we have. Here's what we have sensed and felt and experienced. And here is, equally, if not more important, here is how we think we're called to respond to that. Right? I think Jewish law is, in a way, our kind of response to the divine, and also our attempt to bring ourselves closer to the divine, to what we think is the divine. And, I appreciate that.
Yeah. And then there's also parts of our practice that, well, as you sort of already referenced, like things like our rituals around death and dying that like are just can't be done in the same way. And I've been thinking about Shabbat also, like, if Shabbat is a time that's a break, where you're at home and it's a break from the usual work a day, and now everything's a big mishmash and who knows,
I know. Right. I was thinking about that too, because it's like, it's like when you're like, what day is today? You're like, it's just day, right? Just we're in this day, and it's very, very long. And I don't even know what name it has, but it's just, we're in the day. When I think about Shabbat, like, Shabbat is just so fundamentally, it's so radical. Like, it's just this radical protest against modern consumerist society, which is always saying you're not enough. You don't have enough money, enough wealth, enough beauty. You've got to work more, spend more, work more, spend more. And I think that even today, in this time of COVID-19, well, it doesn't feel as different as it used to, which I think is heartbreaking. I think we can still kind of like tune out all of those workaday consumerist voices that are coming at us through our phones and our screens, in front of which we were spending all our time, or at least I certainly am. I think shutting those down, even that can be a break, right? Like even like having no appliances running, no TV blaring, just having some kind of household quiet can be a break. Although if you have kids in a family, you're definitely not getting any quiet, but quiet from electrical kind of sounds. I think there are ways, but I don't have a rigorous Shabbat practice, and I think it's very hard to do right now.
And I think there's some aspects of what you're describing that are part of this whole experience. Like I've been thinking about the ways that being home all the time makes me think about how much I define myself by productivity and all of the kinds of capitalist impulses that we've internalized deeply, even if we sometimes rail against them or whatever. And so it's an interesting kind of experiment with time overall at this time.
Yes.
We have a question from our audience about the kind of paternalistic aspects of Judaism, and I had a question related to that too, because I was thinking about, I'm always thinking about gender because that's my job and my orientation in the world, but I was also thinking that like here you were as a speechwriter who was kind of helping to working with someone who's really reimagining the role of the first lady and writing for this incredibly strong woman. And then And then you spent years with Jewish texts, which are like mostly written by, about, and for men. So, you know, what was that like? And did you find yourself sort of looking for women's voices in places, or finding women's, you know, hearing echoes in different ways?
Yeah. So, I find it sort of frustrating sometimes when people say to me, "Oh, but what about the sexism in Judaism?" It's like, yes, this is a really ancient religion. When the Torah was written 2,500 years ago, women, women's roles and the conception of women was very different than it is today. That's just a fact. You have to really work to find women's voices. I guarantee you, women's voices were there, even if they weren't recorded. There were plenty of women making their ideas, their thoughts, their beliefs known. They were contributing. I mean, it's heartbreaking that we don't have the recordings of those things that we have of men's voices, because I think we're missing quite a lot. But they are there. You can find them. But actually, I'm not troubled by this, because I think that I look at the Jewish world in which I operate, and there are no limitations on me as a woman. I can be a rabbi. I feel like I've been treated very well as a woman. Many of the congregations I visit are headed. The president's a rabbi. The president is a woman. The head rabbi is a woman. I feel like I'm in spaces where women are very powerful and empowered. So this is not something I feel. Is there the usual just American, gender issues? Of course, right? We're no different from anyone else. I'm not saying that, but I think that the idea that Judaism is sexist, that's not true. We have a history that's certainly very much patriarchal, very much dominated by men, but we have done the very traditional work of continuing to reinterpret our texts, continuing to hear revelation in our time through our evolving, moral progress. And so I think that, in 90% of the Jewish world in America today, that has involved a real re-understanding of how we think about women's issues. And, when people say, well, that's not traditional, women being rabbis isn't traditional, I think I'm a little confused by that, because that's literally what the ancient rabbis were doing. They were re-understanding the Torah in light of the fact that they no longer had a temple through which to worship God. So, to freeze Judaism in the year 1400 or 1700, that's a very radical move. That's not a particularly traditional move. That's a really radical kind of turn of events. And I appreciate the more traditional approach of continuing to interpret our texts. And, look, in the Orthodox world, there are different, women do have different gender roles, and that's also super diverse, right? Orthodoxy is very diverse. You see every kind of thing. And, I don't agree with it, right? I have a disagreement, but, in the world where I operate, it's not an issue. So for me, this just isn't, I wish that there were more women's voices in history that I could access or not. And I do want to see more women's voices today as well. It's something we're still working. We still have a lot of progress to be made, but I guess I've had so many amazing women teachers. I've been inspired by so many women's books. I feel like my entire conclusion is based on Rabbi Benet Lappi's Crash Theory of Judaism. I've been so enriched by that. So I just, to me, Judaism feels like a very woman affirming community.
And so much of the innovation that's happening in the Jewish world, I think, is led by women and by that impulse to kind of read into some of the absences that we know weren't absences, but are absences in what we've inherited.
Exactly. And by the way, and I want to be clear, again, we have the same, Me Too issues of women not being in the highest positions enough. Like there's a lot of work to do. I don't want to gloss over that at all, because it is serious and it is real, but I don't think Judaism is different from the rest of the American community. So that's, but I do want to be clear about that.
Yeah. But I'm thinking also about, I think another place where we can see both some of this doesn't only have to do with gender, but, some of the maybe limitations of the way that Judaism has been structured and the kind of exciting possibilities for expanding Jewish life is something that you mentioned in your chapter about life cycle. And you talk about how, and the chapter mostly focuses on death, because you say like so much of Jewish life cycle is really organized for people who are living in like traditional nuclear families, and is organized around, having kids, and you don't. So just those things weren't kind of part of your daily life in that way.
Exactly. Rabbi Jay Michelson said something so brilliant when I saw him speak this summer. He said, traditional Judaism sort of thinks either you are a kid or you have a kid. I just thought that's it. Right. And look, I don't think that we should get rid of all these traditional life cycle rituals. They're hugely meaningful and powerful and just so beautiful for so many people. But when 50% of American Jews are not married, just like 50% of the overall American population, when only a minority of Jews in their 20s, 30s, 40s, and 50s has kids at home, we've created a Judaism that actually isn't responsive to a significant part of the Jewish community. And I think we have to ask, and I think there's so much great work happening right now. Organizations like, Mayim Hayim, the mikveh in, did I get the right, I'm like
Yep.
blanking right name. I got it right, that was the right name.
Yeah.
In the Boston area, which is, they're really rethinking, how do you do mikveh, right? How can this accommodate, not just the traditional uses, but all kinds of life transitions? And I really appreciate that kind of work.
Yeah. And I think also, like, one of the things that I appreciate as a historian is, we often think like, oh, of course, like Jewish feminism, well, that's why we have women rabbis. And yes, that is true. But if we look back at some of the sort of earlier Jewish feminist texts, we see that early Jewish feminists were advocating not only for women's inclusion in public roles, but also for things like allowing single women to be members of synagogues and changing the way that Jewish communal structures treat the family so that there would be room for women to have roles not just as mothers. So that's a piece that we're kind of like getting back to now, I think, a little bit in different ways.
Absolutely right. And I think, I'm sort of noticing that as we're talking about women's issues, I sort of feel almost a little bit uneasy, because I think that, at least here in America, so much, I think, what women are struggling with has to do with having kids and being in a society that does not support that. It does not support the care of kids or the care of elderly parents. And this disproportionately falls to women. And so, I don't have that experience. So I think that in a way, I feel a little bit reluctant to kind of speak for women or to capture women's experience. I felt like I just couldn't quite do that in my book in a way that felt authentic.
Mm-hmm. So one question I had, this is a little bit of a different question, but I was thinking about, it's on the theme of Judaism as a kind of ongoing struggle and ongoing learning. And I was thinking about how when you publish a book, you're sort of like codifying your perspective in a certain way, right? You're capturing your thoughts at a certain moment. Yeah. So I'm wondering what it's like for you now that your book hasn't been out for that long, but, been out for several months. Like, is it hard to feel like, oh, well, this like captured me at a particular stage along my learning and journey? And like, are there things that you would want to say differently or more, or,
Yeah, that's such a great question. I do, there are little things that I kind of think back on. Like, I don't think I talked enough about community in my book. And I think that's a reflection of the fact that I don't have a traditional Jewish community. And I kind of, in a way, I think that there's so much talk about Jewish community. I almost felt like I wanted to counterbalance it with other things, but that was an omission that I feel like is not quite right. I think I didn't quite get the balance right. So I do wish I talked more about that. But I have to say, I was thinking about when this whole crisis started to unfold. I thought, will my book still be helpful to people now, right? Does it still actually speak to people? And a lot of people have said actually that like they feel like it's more relevant now. Like it just feels like it's dealing more with issues that are more prominent in their lives. I mean, sadly, death is one. Spirituality, I think a lot more people are thinking about, okay, how do I think about the divine? How do I pray? Right? What is prayer? What is Jewish prayer? I think a lot of these things are coming up in ways that maybe they weren't a few months ago. So, overall, it's only been 7 months, but I think if you asked me in a year or two, I would probably have a very long list of things that to change, because that's the nature of Judaism. You can always go a level deeper. You always learn more and realize that your previous understanding was kind of shallow. So that's sort of the risk you take when you commit your words to paper, as you know.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, and I think, I don't think anyone's going to read your book and think it's shallow, but I think of it as like, the way we think about things is sort of like the ocean. Like it's, as the waves come and go, it's deeper and shallower and feels different in different moments, if that makes any sense.
Yes, that makes a lot of sense.
We have a question and please, people, put your questions into the chat. I saw a few people raise their hands. It's easiest for me if the questions are in the chat so that I can just pull them kind of, not seamlessly exactly, but into the conversation. So we have a bunch of questions. One is, of course, about what is next on your agenda,
right?
Which I don't know if you hate that question or not, but
no, not at all. No, it's totally fine. I'd like to write another book, and I'd really like it to be focused on God, spirituality, the divine. I mean, I think this is a an aspect of Judaism that is just way underspoken of. You know, it's sort of strange that we like show up twice a year, say a lot of names for God, leave and never speak of what we mean. That's just it's not a great plan. So I'd love to just really dive into that. I think that's my plan for what's next. You know, I don't have plans to return to politics, although if someone, you know, needed help at some point, I would certainly help, you know, whatever. I think we're at a point where you pitch in wherever you're needed right now. It's kind of a real crisis. But I would like to write this other book.
And what books are you loving, and what are the kinds of things that you're reading to kind of nourish you in this moment?
So I have to be honest, I'm not doing a lot of reading right now. I feel like I'm still kind of trying to gather my scattered attention. So I'm trying to write a book proposal, which is based on books I've already read about God, basically. So I'm doing more kind of in note-taking and outlining. I kind of am reading more of like The New Yorker at night, doing a little TV binge watching. I just got Rachel Kadish's book, The Weight of Ink, and I just started it.
Good.
And it's magnificent. And first of all, she's a lovely person and it's very kind to me about giving advice as an author. Just looking at her book, the depth of research, I'm blown away, and her just gift as a storyteller and a writer, it's beautiful. So I've started that. That is, and I also just read Vivek Murthy, the former Surgeon General. He just released a new book about loneliness, which is beautiful. It is just a beautiful, beautiful and very moving book, and incredibly timely right now, unfortunately.
Yeah, thank you for those recommendations. Yeah. And we spoke with Rachel in our first quarantine book club with Rachel and alongside Tova Mervis. So for anyone who missed that one, you should check out the recording, because it was really fun to talk to them about their work. And that book is just mind-boggling. And she says she doesn't map out her plot. I can't imagine how the story worked that way, but.
Oh my gosh. And Vivek's book is entitled Together. That's the title.
There's a question about Michelle Obama's book, and whether did it have an influence on you? Were you in conversation with her about it at all?
You know, I wasn't involved with the book. I think at the end of the administration, I just decided I wanted to focus full time on my own book. So I wasn't involved in that book. I've helped her out with things here and there, like some speech writing stuff, occasionally, but I wasn't involved with the book. Although I know the people who are kind of helping her out with it, and I was blown away by it. I just, the depth of honesty, the insights, the beautiful detail and texture of it. I mean, it is so her. But it's so her. You just hear her voice coming through. And I love that now people are getting this kind of exposure to her that is it's much more personal than I think was possible in the White House First Lady role. So I love the book. Absolutely love it.
I listened to the audiobook with her reading it, and it was just like, it was so great.
It's really good.
We will put the book recommendations in the chat so that people can follow up on that. Lots of desires for Michelle Obama to be the vice president. That we don't have. I'm sure you don't have.
She will never run for office.
Yeah.
She's such an honest person. When she says she's not running, she's not running. She doesn't want to do it.
Lex, do you want to jump in? I know you had some questions.
I would love to jump in. So hello, everybody. I've changed my background so that you can order this incredible book here all along. This is a link to do so, bit.ly/QBC Sarah Hurwitz. Anyway, question. I really agree with, I think, Judith, you said at the top that just one skill you have in this book is taking the stuff of Judaism, taking the, oh my gosh, there's just so much quantity here and I didn't learn this and what's going on, and just distilling to essence, to sort of like understandable bits. And I loved what you said at the top about how like the Talmud assumes you know all this stuff. Like we got to sometimes back out and just say like, here's the gist. So I'm hyper aware of where we are in the rhythms of the calendar year. Right at the top of the show, right as we were starting, Judith, your Omer count, your app went off, your little alarm for the counting of the Omer. And one of my favorite parts of your book, Sarah, is when you introduce for many of your readers, I think. For others, it's not their first introduction, but you introduce Shavuot. You introduce this season of the year between Passover, where you count the days of the Omer, and then you head into Shavuot. And I'm not going to say much more because I'd love to pass to you and just have you flex that skill that you're so good at, where you just sort of break down what is Shavuot. There are probably people on this call that have never really done it before. It's a few weeks away. What is this period of the year that we're in, and why might we find it meaningful?
Yeah, so Passover celebrates the liberation of our ancestors, the Israelites, from Egypt. And then, Shavuot commemorates the moment when they gathered at Mount Sinai after being liberated from Egypt, and God gives them the Torah, essentially, gives them what I think of is kind of their mission, which, reading the Torah, I think that the mission that the Israelites, our ancestors, and by extension us, were given, essentially what God says to them is, you need to build a society that is the exact opposite of Egypt. You need to build a society where the vulnerable are cared for, the widow, the orphan, person who's economically struggling, the stranger. That person is created in the divine image. That person needs to be cared for. That's where your orbit of concern really needs to focus, as opposed to on the emperor, the king, right? So it's sort of, I think the Shavuot celebrates the moment when we were given our mission statement as the Jewish people. We were given our freedom, and on Passover, we celebrate being given our freedom. And on Shavuot, we are told what exactly we're supposed to do with that freedom. And Shavuot is also a time that's associated with Jews by choice, people who choose to convert to Judaism. And I think that is so important. I'm just the biggest fan of Jews by choice. Well, I certainly don't think we should proselytize. I would really like to advocate for a radical and enthusiastic and maybe even borderline aggressive welcoming, because I will tell you that every class I have taken, every community I've been part of, the people who came to Judaism, as adults who chose it for themselves, they are more knowledgeable, they are more passionate, they have a perspective and just a depth of engagement that I just think a lot of us who were born into Judaism, we really lack. So I think that's a really special part of Shavuot is celebrating those who've chosen to throw in their lot with us, to be part of our people.
I am really with you. My mom's name is Ruth, by the way, and so I have a soft spot for the book of Ruth, which is associated with Shavuot, and which includes that part about famously somebody who, Ruth herself, is seen as a convert. That was the main question I had to ask, and there's others from participants that I want to pass back to Judith, but I always love learning from you and talking with you. So
thank you. Right back at you, my friend. I feel the same way about you.
Awesome. Judith.
Thank you, Lex. We have a question about your law school training and how that helped or hindered you in becoming a writer.
Yeah, not at all. Just really, I hate to, they're like, no, but it must have helped you. It really didn't. I'm still baffled by my law school experience. Like, it was a very strange kind of training that didn't necessarily prepare me to be a lawyer. I was a lawyer for a couple of years, and I just kind of had to learn how to do that at the law firm where I worked. But it was very much just picking through these old legal cases, and it might have taught me how to be maybe a law professor, but it didn't. It just was a really technical and kind of weird education that I don't think it helped me. I hate to say that, except for I did take a negotiation class, which was excellent. And that I think actually helped me a lot, just with the basic, the relationship part of being a speechwriter, because as a speechwriter in the White House, you're not just sitting around kind of, with a pipe and a little fancy jacket, just, typing like Hemingway. You are getting, you're getting feedback from the person you're writing for. And then we would send around our speeches for Mrs. Obama to maybe 50 people in the White House. For the president, it might be 70 or 80. And you would get feedback from all over the administration, from fact checkers, policy experts, lawyers, communications people. And we wanted to make sure that this was accurate. But, a policy wonk's version of accuracy and a human being's version of accuracy are very different. So it was a lot of negotiation, a lot of trying to kind of figure out how to keep the speech coherent and moving, yet still accurate and appropriate. So that was, I think I learned a lot from that negotiations class about that.
Wow. Yeah, that sounds like a logistical nightmare, let alone the negotiation piece, just like keeping track of all the
You have to be very organized. But I have to say, that's actually a lot that's similar to how I wrote my book, where probably every chapter was reviewed by at least 20 people. And I so appreciate that input.
Yeah, well, it's great it's like to know how to take feedback and work with it is a huge skill.
Hugely helpful.
Yeah. I'm thinking about this kind of question of like, what are the opportunities, or what are the things that we're forced to change in this moment? And we've sort of touched on this a little bit in terms of like, we talked a little bit about Shabbat. We sort of mentioned in passing, like death rituals and maybe prayer. Are there particular things that you're seeing, sort of innovations that are coming out in this moment that you see as hopeful or as creative in new ways? Like, how do you, as somebody who's kind of like looked over the course of sort of history of how different things have been practiced, do you see a lot of creativity happening in this moment, or do you think we're not quite there yet?
It's a good question. I mean, I think, hopefully we will be at some point, probably farther away than we would all like, but at some point we won't have to be in this physical distancing kind of situation. So I don't, I do think many things will kind of go back to being in person. But what I think has especially moved me is to see the way that people are in very non-traditional ways deeply embodying the whole point of the tradition. So I'm thinking of, I recently wrote an op-ed in the Washington Post about chesed, loving kindness.
Mm-hmm.
And I told the story that I had heard from a friend of mine who's a rabbi of, unfortunately, this a man he had passed away, and his wife of 43 years, he passed away from COVID-19, and his wife of 43 years was like heartbroken because she couldn't, they can't do the traditional, the burial, the shiva, all the things you normally do. And so, it was not an Orthodox congregation, I think, Reform, Reconstructionist, but she actually learned about the tradition that is traditionally usually done among more observant folks of forming a receiving line at the end of the funeral, where the mourners walk, people form a line on either side of the mourners, and the mourners walk through, and the people say to them, they offer condolences basically. And this woman was very moved by this idea, and she thought like, well, what if we figured out a way to do this in our cars? And she had people drive to the synagogue parking lot, line their cars up on either side, and her car with her family, they drove through this line of cars, and people like blew kisses from their cars. They stood beside their cars and put their hands on their hearts. It was, and so I wrote this. I didn't actually know who it was, but then she actually contacted me and just sent me a beautiful email. And I was so moved by how, we're talking about cars, right? It's very modern technology, but what a deep and beautiful way to honor Jewish tradition. She got it exactly right, right? The whole point of that is to gather your community, to show their love and support for you. And she just nailed it, right? It's perfect. So I think that seeing things like that, where people manage to embody the real beating heart purpose of the tradition using what's available right now, I think that's absolutely the way to go.
Yeah, that's a really beautiful story. I was thinking about that so much when I was rereading your chapter about death, and I do feel, and I've said this many times, that I feel like Judaism really does a great job with death. Like the rituals are so powerful and so helpful, and so like offer such a container, and to not, and I know from friends who have been going through this, like to not be able to have those at your disposal is just such a, it's completely, like destabilized, like you don't know what you're supposed to do. But I also know I've been part of these online shivas, and there is something beautiful that can happen there too, even if it's not the way that you would ideally want to do it. And
it's different. I think, a rabbi I love named Shoshana Boyd Gelfin, I was in a study session with her before Passover, and she was saying, listen, your Seder, don't try to make it the same as usual. The point is not to move your usual Seder onto Zoom. So don't try to make it the same, but do try to make it memorable. I thought that was just beautiful advice, where it's like, it's not, you don't have to identically capture the old thing on video, but can you make it meaningful and memorable for what it is and what it can be? And I think that was really great advice.
It's great advice. And it requires that we're able to sort of like let go of the mourning we feel for not being able to do things the way we might want to do them. But once we're able to do that,
it's letting go of that additional layer of suffering that says it shouldn't be like this. I should be able to do it that way. It's like, okay, we're already suffering enough. If you've lost someone, you're already in such deep pain and grief. Having that additional suffering on top of it, it's too much, right? It's like letting that go. I think you're right. It's like, okay, this can't be the way it usually is. What can it be?
Right. Which frees us up to try new things that like we might not try otherwise. we were
Absolutely.
saying before we even started this conversation, some of you may have been on early, that like even just doing this kind of virtual book conversation was something we had talked about at JWA for a long time, and then felt like, nah, people want to talk about books in person, and we've been so surprised by how meaningful this has been for us and for everyone, and to feel like a sense of community with people who we can't even see is just like, I wouldn't have
Totally.
known that was possible, and it makes me feel like there's so much potential out there that we don't tap because we're not forced to in some way.
Exactly. And like, I will say as an author, I'm very limited in how many people I can reach by traveling, right? Like to do an event like this, I would travel for a day, it would be a big thing. And now it's like, there are people from all over the country and internationally who are all here together in this Zoom space. And that's extraordinary. And it's such an honor and a privilege. So you're right. I think some of the things actually we might continue on after this ends.
Right. I was excited to see someone from Australia.
So cool.
There was an interesting question about community and sort of the relationship between Judaism and community, and like, how do you see that? Like, do you feel like it's very important for your Jewish practice to be rooted in community, or is there a kind of more independent spirit that you can pursue?
I think it is, right? I think community is really important to Judaism. I mean, so much of Judaism contemplates us coming together to celebrate holidays, to support each other in times of life cycle transition. So I do think that's really important. And again, I kind of regret that I didn't write more about that in my book. But that said, I think that communities can take on so many different forms. Synagogues are wonderful communities for so many people. I don't like it when people attack synagogues, because I think they are working for many people. So I think that's a great form of community. For me, I find just tremendous community in the Jewish meditation world. Organizations like Or Halev and the Institute for Jewish Spirituality, those are where I've met some of my dearest friends and mentors and people who've just supported me on this journey. And I feel very close to that community. I have a Jewish community that's basically my Shabbat club, where every few weeks we had Shabbat dinner together back when we could do that. Now we have a weekly Havdalah together on Zoom, right? They're such an important part of my Jewish community. So I do think community is critical, but I think you can find it in different ways.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. I mean, I think it's true that we sometimes we're narrow in our definition of what Jewish community looks like, but
yeah, we need community, we need institutions. They don't have to look like what they used to look like, but the idea that we're all just going to be Jews alone in our homes, that's not what Judaism is.
Right. There's a couple different questions about things that are, what are the things that you are listening to about? I mean, I know you said you're going to have a new podcast about God and things like that, but are there other things that you listen to or that you're, kind of using to continue to learn and explore about Judaism or spirituality?
Funny, I actually don't listen to podcasts really, which is sort of interesting. It's never something I've done. And actually, the new thing I'm doing is going to be a jewishLIVE kind of Zoom show, or it's going to be like video wise. I think I'll be interviewing various people about their thoughts and perspectives about God, the divine, spirituality. Yeah, I don't listen to podcasts. I binge watched The Good Place recently, which was actually really interesting. I started watching Unorthodox, which is amazing. So yeah, but in the past, I think there's so much good teaching from organizations like the Hartman, like Hadar, both Or Halev and Institute for Jewish Spirituality. They both have wonderful teachings online. So I've benefited a lot from just what various Jewish organizations are putting out online.
Mm-hmm. Where do you see I can't think of the right way to say this. Sorry, I'm having one of those moments of loss of language, but you're sort of, you were just talking about sort of all the amazing resources that are out there. Are there places where you feel like is a weird lack of resources in the American Jewish community that you wish there were kind of people stepping in to address different needs or topics that are, are kind of under?
Yeah. I think that there's actually we have a really amazing opportunity in people who are kind of post-college, pre-family, kids, kind of life, or a really intense career, that's sort of 20s, early 30s. I think that's a really good time to reach people, to engage them with Judaism, because I really think that the biggest challenge that we face in the Jewish community in America today, by far, is a lack of basic literacy. And I can just say, speaking from my own experience, you know, Judaism is, for me, was really stale and rote and just kind of lame when I didn't know anything. Right. It just was. And I really, you know, I would go to these other traditions and think, oh, Buddhism, this is so sophisticated. Western philosophy, this is deep. Well, I was engaging with those on an adult level, and I've been engaging with Judaism as a 9-year-old, right? Like that, you can't really compare those things. So I think, you know, for a long time, we've kind of conceived Judaism as this almost like an American style ethnicity, which makes no sense because Jews are every race and every ethnicity. So that's actually not a thing. But, you know, it's almost been like, oh, you know, we came to America, there were Italians and Irish and Germans and Jews. And 3 to 4 generations later, whose really central identity has to do with being Irish or Italian or German? No one, right? And now we're at generation 3 or 4, and you have a lot of Jews saying, you know, I'm a cultural Jew, I'm Jewish by heritage. That's not going to sustain Judaism. We have to know something. We have to become adult Jews, which is something that I had to do. And it was hard. And that's why I wrote this book, because I just thought no one should have to spend thousands of hours to put this together for themselves. No one has that time. But I wanted to just save people all that time and say, okay, look, here's a starting point for you. So I think that, you know, that kind of 20s, early 30s, when people are beginning to build their career, haven't yet, you know, they sort of have some time and they're adults. I think that's a really good time to start learning and engaging.
Yeah. Well, and also to say, I have to give you like big props for being willing to delve into something at which you weren't expert. You know, like I think it's really hard for people who are used to
definitely
being,
not an expert.
Right. No, but like I think for so many people who are used to being advanced in their field and feel smart a lot of the time and, you know, kind of know what they're talking about, to then return to something where you don't, and where you're starting from scratch, and where it's not a place where you feel like you can show all the things that you know, I think that that's really hard. I see that as somebody who teaches adult education, how uncomfortable it makes people who are used to being experts in their field to go back to a place where they're not. And I think that takes a lot of courage. So I appreciated that so much about your project, that you were willing to do that.
Thank you. It was terrifying. And it was the reason why I had dozens of rabbis checking everything, because I kept saying, I don't know what I don't know. And, you know, having that kind of realistic understanding of where you are, it helped. And I learned a lot by doing it.
Well, you got there, you got to this place, but to be able to be willing to spend the time in those earlier phases, I'm sure was very strange.
Yes, for sure.
There was a question about how your family feels about you making this turn towards Judaism as a professional exploration.
You know, it's funny. I think that in modern American society, unfortunately, the discourse, our national conversation around religion, has basically been hijacked by some of just the most extreme voices, right? The most hateful and bigoted and stupid voices have kind of captured that conversation. So, you know, when you're someone who travels in smart, thoughtful circles and you begin to, you know, kind of engage in a religion, people are like, oh God, what's happening? Is she checking her brain at the door? Is she becoming an extremist, right? There's a fear that like, oh, you're becoming one of them who thinks there's a man in the sky who she needs to like grovel to. It's like, so I could see, you know, I think my friends, my family at first were a little bit nervous, like, oh God, is she having some crisis? But I think they realized very soon that no, I wasn't. This was something that was actually opening up more complexity for me rather than less. It was actually generating more questions than answers, and that I was pursuing it the same way I've always pursued things in my life. I think they were thrilled. Right? They were really excited just to see me happy and excited, and they've like enjoyed the book. So it's been great.
That's awesome. Yeah. Yeah. I mean, and I think it's such a great invitation to just continue to learn and struggle, and to make it okay to ask questions, and also to like unearth the questions that have always been there that you haven't, that many of us don't have a chance to really delve into. So, and
there are just so many ways to be Jewish. I think for so long we presented people with this weird dichotomy of, okay, either you're a serious Jew, which means that you are Orthodox, or you're not, which means that you are nothing. It's like, those aren't the options. There are serious, committed, passionate Jews of every denomination and no denominations.
Mm-hmm.
But I really want to open up this idea of what it means to be a really serious and engaged and excited Jew. I think there's so many different ways to do it. And so I really just want people to come in and just start learning, and just start learning, right? Just like, I think my book is a good starting point, and it has an appendix of resources at the back that just says, okay, here's how you can continue this journey. And I have discussion guides on my website, which is just sarahhurwitz.net, that, if you want to talk about it with your friends, with a book group, or just with yourself, right? They're kind of provocative questions that ask like, okay, how does this hit you? How does this matter in your life? So I just want to encourage people to just not be afraid, right? Just don't be afraid. You are so welcome here. There's no such thing as a bad Jew or a good Jew. There's just a Jew who hasn't had the chance to be inspired, who hasn't had access to that inspiration and that learning, and those who have. That's the only division.
Well, thank you so much for that invitation and for opening this up for us. And, I think I started by saying that we're in this period where we're kind of wandering through the wilderness, but it's wonderful to remember we're not alone in doing that.
Yes,
that we're
exactly.
all wandering through the wilderness together, and can help guide each other and hold each other through that. So thank you so much.
Sure. Thank you so much. Thank you for hosting this. This was great.
It was.
And thanks
it was
for all of you for
really
coming.
fun.
Thank you.
It was great to be together with everybody. And for everybody here, you should all know, hopefully you know, that we've extended the Quarantine Book Club series. So we are going to be meeting from now on at this time, or for the next 4 weeks at least, at this time, Thursday at 8 p.m. Eastern time. Next week, we're going to be talking with transgender activist and former chassid Abby Stein about her memoir, Becoming Eve, which is really fabulous.
She is fabulous. It'll be great.
She is fabulous. So that's going to be really fun. So come back and join us next week. And in the meantime, if you're looking for more conversations like these, you should also check out JWA's podcast, Can We Talk? And the Judaism Unbound podcast also, and you can get either of them wherever you get your podcasts, as well as on our website. So thank you so much for being with us tonight. And I hope everybody will stay healthy and safe and find the right questions to be grappling with in this moment.
Thank you.
Good night, everybody. Wonderful.
Great.
All right.